is because a broken system is so easy to manipulate. I mean, there really is no formidable argument to be made against voter ID. Warnings of voter suppression are just another example of introducing the racism argument into silencing debate on our low integrity process. Now, as technology companies are currently playing whack-a-mole, censoring the deluge of videos being shared virally showing instances of cheating and abuse, we thought it would be helpful to identify all the categories where things go wrong in the voting process and to point them out. So we're going to go through mail-out ballots to the entire voter database and all of the risks therein, especially with the increase in this with COVID provisions. Number 2, walk-ins, provisional balloting, challenge balloting, all at the walk-in polling place. Number 3, we're going to go through voting machine manipulation, electronic ballots, the touchscreen voting machines. Number 4, we're going to go through tabulation manipulation, and then lastly do timeline manipulation. Let's go through the first one. So mailing out ballots, we've always had some people vote by mail, either military people overseas or people who have marked themselves permanent absentee voters with their registrar. And there's always been some percentage of the total voters. This time, 40% of the people in the election voted by mail. So what happens when we are sending out to the entire voter database? Now, many people have reported that they've received multiple ballots at their residence for people who used to live at their address, right? There are videos of people talking to mail carriers about getting more ballots given to them, maybe because their ballots was sent to voter at, it's no longer at the address, so the mailman knows that, hey, I can take this ballot and give it to this person who wants it. There are cases of ballots being stolen from mailboxes. There's evidence of ballots being returned for people who are long deceased, right? We've seen that, people looking up on the ballot received database. There's not a lot of effort to clean up these dead people or move people, change of address from the voter rolls. So when you have the poll watchers who are required to stand so far away from the poll workers, the oversight on signature matching and voter lookups to make sure it's a valid voter, I mean, all that is moot. So one macro way that we can look to see, how this went wrong is to look at the vote distribution of all the mailed-in ballots versus the in-person voting over previous election cycles and see how that changed on this one. And we're going to do that in a later episode today. All right, number 2, election day voting, so walk-ins. Now, many states have a final day to register to vote in advance of the election, but I mean, they don't really turn people away. When somebody just walks in and wants to vote, they do a provisional ballot. Now, does that ballot get tabulated in the official count? I mean, what if this voter went to multiple precincts? What if the voter had mailed in a ballot and they walked in and said they had not voted? Registrars are telling us that what they do to ensure integrity here is they do a signature match. They verify that a walk-in voter hasn't voted elsewhere. But the robustness of this process is pretty questionable, especially when the poll watchers are not allowed to actually witness these checks being made. All right, so in addition to this, there's really no interstate coordination to ensure that a voter didn't vote in 2 different states. I know during the 2016 election, we had a lot of people in California that were voting in the morning, and then they went up to Nevada and they went voting up there. So there's also the ability for the poll worker to see the party registration of the voter. I mean, they could do something to compromise that person casting their ballot, using a pen that won't register or failing to remind them to require their signature. I mean, look, in our divided times, we have to see that even these small transgressions are going to add up, or not. They might not get added to the total. Number 3, voting machine manipulation. We've always been told that voting machines are not online, right? That they can't be hacked. The whole conversation in the 2016 election was the Russians hacked our election. We've been told that there's an air gap, right? The machines are not online. The machines can't be a Wi-Fi client. Now, this election, there are reports that voting machines are online. So that would subject them to some kind of hackability. Somebody outside of a polling location could hack into, be on the same Wi-Fi network nearby. Or even if this thing's on the network and has a back door, there's some way for somebody to SSH into an actual poll machine and somehow compromise it. And then lastly, I mean, what would the implications be for updating the software, right? The actual software that runs on that touchscreen machine could be randomly and undetectably, changed to increment a favored party's votes. Number 4, tabulation manipulation, right? So the precincts, you go to a precinct and vote, or your polling location, they all deliver their physical ballots to the county registrar. And then those mail-in ballots are also received by the registrar. So that's all coming in via postal mail. Now the registrars are sending their tabulations electronically to the secretary of that state, right? So this is an interesting step in the process because it's highly vulnerable to manipulation. I mean, in our discovery, we've seen that in this case, a transposition of tabulated vote counts will show a tranche of votes for one candidate swapped with those for the other. We've seen cases where you've seen the television screen showing the results of an election actually swapping, transposing in real time. I mean, in no case should you ever see the votes of a candidate be decreased on election night, right? Especially when the votes for the other candidate get increased by the same amount. This is always how it seems to happen. We saw this in Michigan, in Antrim County, and in other counties as well. I mean, we saw this. There's a video going around showing the governor's race in Kentucky in 2018 that this happened. And it happened live on screen in front of people watching a broadcast. Now, why would this happen? Well, you saw our video on Scorecard, Hammer and Scorecard, citing this CIA deposition from an insider general who was a whistleblower talking about this Scorecard program. And the transposition, the actual swapping of these columns of data, and especially in a district where you can predict who the true victor is pretty malicious because it actually doesn't require the manufacturing of any vote increment, right? The count distributions for random numbers should still pass the Benford test for uniformity in random numbers. So if you get caught, then, right, you've got plausible deniability, right? Because it's an honest mistake. I just flipped two numbers side by side. That's a big problem. And then lastly, we have timeline manipulation. I mean, not only does this election feel like it's taken forever, even the voting season has been extremely long. Like many states sent out ballots the first week of October, and in some cases are allowing voters to send back their ballots as late as November 12th. I mean, we got the case of Philadelphia. We've learned that ballots received by the 6th would be counted even if they weren't postmarked. And then the Supreme Court ruled that no, the ballots have to be separated from those that are received by the 3rd. But then there's also videos discussing the, insiders at the United States Postal Service agreeing to reverse postmark ballots back to the 3rd so that they can be counted. So it's just a mess. I mean, one way the voter registrar has kind of assuaged the concerns in the past is by telling the public through the election night how many mail-out ballots or mail-in ballots were sent, and how many are not returned, right? So you have a sense of how many outstanding ballots there are. But that wasn't done in 2020. Why? Well, I mean, if you tell people you're only waiting for 30,000 ballots that haven't been returned by mail, and the current voting rate favors Trump to win, then you've kind of run out of runway to cheat, right? The public will know that if 100,000 ballots now come in, that 70,000 of them are fraudulent, or maybe some of the ballots that you've already cast were fraudulent. So that's why this calling, or stalling rather, of the election count on election night was so nefarious. It was done for exactly these kinds of shenanigans, to figure out where the votes needed to be made up and from what counties it could happen. I mean, it was a major, major fraud on the American people. And also, I mean, why haven't they called Alaska or North Carolina for Trump yet? I mean, to show him sitting at 214 in terms of electoral votes, it's pretty disingenuous, because a lot of these states are for sure going to go for him. But they wanted to appear as there's this gap, this wild gap between Biden and Trump. Okay, I hope you found this video helpful in kind of categorizing the places where the integrity of our election can be undermined. If you don't already follow us, consider following us on all the socials at America's New C, on Facebook at America's New Clothes. And look for another episode from us today exploring more on the statistical front in terms of these anomalies that are proof that this 2020 election looks right now like it was stolen. Thanks.